I saw myself as one who was righteous enough to be born into a Mormon household, but that needed to consistently hold to the rod and work hard enough. And I was willing to do that. And so that's the way I saw myself. I had goals, I had everything mapped out for me my whole life. I needed to obey in order to merit the mercy of God. The grace articulated in the Christian community was too cheap. I felt that we were saved after all that we can do. It's not just Christ alone, right? So he was necessary, but he wasn't sufficient. I wanted to be changed in the church to the degree that I didn't agree with their standards or that they weren't going far enough. I started to question not the doctrine of the Mormon church and not the truthfulness and the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith. That was not in my purview. I just didn't understand why the current leadership was saying some of the things that they were saying publicly. And this family member told me he kind of didn't want to go too much into it, but he's like, hey, just go check out this site called Mormon Think. And I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. And I was pretty nervous because you're not really supposed to go seek out content about the LDS church that isn't from the LDS church, right? I wanted to go to approved, safe sources that validated my perspective. But I also didn't think that there were historical issues. It's not that I was avoiding it because I thought there were. I wanted to doubt my doubts instead of my faith, which is what we're told to do. But because I did start to have some cracks in my testimony of the current leadership, I did go to Mormon Think, and I did read about some of the history, and that's when everything broke. There was just so much, it started to add up that I don't even recognize my church anymore. And so it got to the point for me where I was so sure of everything. And then all of a sudden I was sure of nothing. I felt so different and called, so special. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm just like everybody else, confused about who they are and what this all is about. We're just floating around on this rock and it's just super confusing. And by Christmas, I had completely deconstructed my faith entirely. Do I decide to follow what is true, or do I try to make Mormonism work? And I used to think they were the same thing. But when I realized that they weren't, I had to make a decision on what mattered more. Was it more important to be a Mormon, or was it more important to find the truth? My whole life it was pray to know if the Book of Mormon is true, and subjective feelings is how we decipher what is true. And I no longer could use my feelings as a litmus test for truth. It just wasn't going to work for me. I couldn't be an atheist. It just wasn't intellectually consistent for me to be an atheist. I saw intelligent design, I saw absolute morality, I saw all these things. And so I read Genesis, and to see just how different those profound truths were at the time, obviously that led me to be like, okay, well, what about Islam? What about Christianity? What about Judaism? So it kind of was like, we've got these great monotheistic faiths. So that's when I started to look a little bit more into, okay, well, this is gonna kind of, for me at least, hinge on the resurrection, because every one of them claims something very different about Christ. And I felt that if Christ really was resurrected, that there would be some type of historical footprint to back that up. I became obsessed with learning about the New Testament and what it said about Christ and the reliability and the archaeological support. There was no other conclusion that I could draw except for the fact that Jesus rose from the dead. It was almost as if I had looked at Jesus through a circus mirror my whole life, and his face was contorted and not everything was the way it really is. And it was almost as if once I started reading the New Testament, I saw a different Christ. That was so revolutionary for me to hear that while we were still sinners, we weren't perfect, we weren't clean on our own, that Christ died for us. I might have heard it, of course, through Christians, but again, it was too cheap and it wasn't real. And I feel like he opened up my heart to have ears to hear for the first time what the gospel is. He was calling me to see who I was and that I needed him so that I would run to the foot of the cross and that I would fully give myself to him knowing that there was no other way. There was a freedom there that I didn't have when I was LDS. His righteousness supersedes mine, thank God, because I am not righteous. And that was very liberating for me to just be like, okay, I can take it all off. I can take the mask off, I don't have to try so hard. And I'm not enough. And I'm no longer trying to exalt myself. I'm just here to exalt God. And that was such a huge paradigm shift for me. Well, having been both a Mormon and a Christian, I can say there's nothing like the transforming power of grace alone. It's not fear-led anymore. Nothing can change you as much as the love of Christ and knowing that you're fully loved and fully forgiven. And so when I wake up in the morning, it's not, okay, what am I gonna do today to earn God's love? Or what am I gonna do today to earn a spot in his kingdom? It is gratitude that I am saved, and gratitude that I can stand at the foot of the cross every day and say, God, thank you for saving a wretch like me.